Hey everyone, and thanks for tuning in to our online service. We're glad you joined us, whether you've been part of Highview for a while or perhaps have just found us online. Either way, I'll just remind us all that one of the best ways to make sure we know what's happening at Highview is to check out our website, hcckw.ca. It's especially important that we stay connected during this prolonged time of being apart. And we keep saying this, but it's true. One of the best ways we can connect with each other in this time of separation is through prayer. This week, our prayer focus reflects the fact that this is the first Sunday in the season of Lent, a time when we pause to consider the cross and reflect on all that it means to us. Our prayer focus this week is this, that we would focus on all that Christ has done for us as we move through this particular Lenten season. We have a Lent prayer guide available as well to help us in our times of reflection. Thank you to our prayer squad leader, Ann King, who has put this together for us, with quotes received from many of you from our favorite worship songs. To find the guide, you can click on the link in the Friday email. And if you would like a paper copy mailed to you, contact Ann at info@hcckw.ca. Our reflections in these next 7 weeks will be on the final words of Jesus from the cross. Ruth Breithaupt, our intern pastor, brings today her message on the word of forgiveness.
What do you need to hear from Jesus right now? Right now, in this long, dark winter of our discontent. As Christians, we have this audacious belief that Jesus does actually speak to us, that part of having a living, dynamic relationship with a risen Savior is that he longs to and actually does have something to say to us up close and personal like. So what do you need to hear from him right now? Over the next 7 weeks, we're going to do some careful listening together as a church. And the pattern for our listening will be in the form of an ancient liturgy known as the 7 last words. It's stemming from the 16th century, so it's an old tradition of the church. Sometimes it's called words from the cross or even final words. It's a harmonized gathering from all 4 Gospels of the 7 last words or phrases recorded as being spoken by Jesus as he hung on the cross. His final words. So what do you need to hear from Jesus right now? The Bible records Jesus as being on the cross for 6 hours. And likely there were other things that he said during that period of time. But these are the words that those who were there remembered and reported. And ultimately, either they themselves or those they reported it to wrote them down. These were the words of great significance to the gospel writers, of big importance as they crafted their stories of Jesus' life, death, and resurrection. As we listen our way through these last words during these next 7 weeks, I want to strongly encourage you to put aside any preconceived ideas, any doubts or skepticism, and just be courageous enough, or even maybe even curious enough to see what it is that Jesus might want to say to you between now and Easter Sunday morning. There will be some hard words spoken in these series. I mean, a long meditation on the cross can't help but be difficult. But it is our hope, all 5 of us who will be teaching this series together, that you will be lifted and encouraged and challenged and inspired and maybe rebuked by the Spirit as you let him take you there, but also given life as you listen to Jesus. The final words of Jesus. And the first that we look at today is a word of forgiveness. Luke chapter 23, 33 to 38 is where we're going to be this morning, so you can get your Bibles open and ready for that. And as we move throughout the series, you're going to notice overlaps in the narrative. We'll be picking up the story of Jesus' last hours at various places and then coming back to another gospel account different weeks throughout the series. Right now, we pick up the account in Luke in chapter 23, starting at verse 33 and going to verse 38 for this morning's reading. When they came to the place called the Skull, there they crucified him, along with the criminals, one on his right and the other on his left. Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." And they divided up his clothes by casting lots. The people stood watching, and the rulers even sneered at him. They said, "He saved others. Let him save himself if he is the Christ of God, the chosen one." The soldiers also came up and mocked him. They offered him wine vinegar and said, "If you are the king of the Jews, save yourself." There was a written notice above him which read, "This is the King of the Jews." And so begins our long look at the cross. And I'm hoping our hearts will be challenged in this morning is that if Jesus could forgive this, then there's nothing you and I are ashamed of that's beyond his grace. And there's no hate you and I are holding on to that's justified. That's where I hope we can get to this morning. Let's see if we can get there together. If Jesus could forgive this. I grew up knowing that Jesus died on the cross. I think my parents and other spiritual guides of my life at the time did the right thing by making the horrifying details of that age appropriate for me. And actually what they did was what the gospel writers themselves do, more or less just state it as a fact without going into all the gory details necessarily. I remember being aware that nails did go into the hands and feet of Jesus. We even had actions to songs that would indicate that. But in my childlike naivety, I assumed that Jesus did what I would do if I were God and had all kinds of God powers hanging on a cross and make that not hurt. But I do remember the moment when it all dawned on me. I might have been 10 or 11 years old. We were watching Ben-Hur on our TV at home, the Charlton Heston version of that. This was back in the time when it was considered sacrilegious to actually depict Jesus too much. Like we never saw his face in the entire movie. But there was a scene where they're lifting up the cross and then it comes thudding down into the hole in the ground, and I'm not sure why, but in that moment on the couch with my family, it hit me. Jesus suffered. He felt the pain. Fast forward into a more modern era of movie making, and we have all the gory details displayed quite graphically, quite vividly in Mel Gibson's The Passion. The movie isn't for everyone, I get it. And in fact, when I fainted that day in Thailand, I was in a service where they were showing scenes from this movie, Mel Gibson's The Passion of Jesus being crucified, and it's part of what made me feel so ill. And I won't recite all the gory details here. I won't go into the way historians describe a crucifixion or even how Mel Gibson depicts it. It's probably from The Passion, that movie, that's probably quite accurate and thorough. You've probably heard a recitation of the details before. You can look it up or watch the movie if you so choose. But most of us in our culture in the West in these modern times are rightly shocked and horrified and revulsed by such images because it's not part of our everyday life. Thank God for that. But the gruesome factors of Jesus' physical suffering, all the gory details, would have been, for Luke's readers, a common experience. Luke and the other gospel writers didn't need to go into all the gory details because it was common knowledge, because crucifixions were common and they were public. That was the point. See, the physical suffering, as wretched as it was only part of this. What the Romans were after in any crucifixion was utter degradation, making the crucified one subhuman. Crucifixion, it sent an unmistakable message. The person you see before you is not fit to live, not even human. The phrase the Romans used, damnatio ad bestias, means condemned to the death of a beast. Although today, in today's world, to kill even an animal in this way would be considered a heinous crime. At Christmas, we often refer to, and I do when I'm preaching at Christmas, this whole idea that the incarnation, wonder and awe that God came down to the mess of human birth and all the way down to be laid in an animal's feeding trough. How amazing, how humbling. But baby Jesus laying there had further down to go. At least there he was the cherished newborn of doting parents and shepherds and wise men. They worshipped him. Here, on the cross, he is nothing. Nothing. Stripped of every sense of personhood. Luke records the taunting, the sneering, the mocking, the challenge to save himself, the psychological twisting of that, the degradation and utter humiliation that was supposed to be part of the experience. This was part of the punishment that the practice of crucifixion was supposed to bear on the person being executed, and it was all public. And by the way, Jesus was naked. We respectfully depict him on the cross with a covering. That was not so. Utterly exposed, vulnerable, humiliated. The people doing this to Jesus, those who started the legal process that they knew would lead to this. They knew it would lead to this. Those who cried out in a raging mob, "Crucify him," knowing it would lead to this. Those who laid him down and drove the nails into his flesh, all of them embodied the most sadistic, inhuman, evil impulses that lie within us. The Holy One of Heaven, who deserves our utter adoration, receiving our utter degradation instead. Jesus, who being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be grasped, but made himself nothing. He humbled himself and became obedient to death, even death on a cross. all this torture, all this hatred, all this degradation is being received by the one who deserves our highest praise and worship and awe and love. Honestly, what unspeakable self-control and submission. How did Jesus not rise up and free himself of the torture and demand to be worshipped instead? And yet, we have the first words of Jesus as words offering forgiveness. Jesus asks for God's mercy towards those whose hearts could do this. If it were me, these would not be the first words out of my mouth. So if Jesus could forgive this, that must mean there's nothing you and I are ashamed of that's beyond his grace. Nothing. What do you need to hear from Jesus right now? Shame is an insidious thing. It can lurk in the dark shadows of our minds. It could be kind of hidden, unseen for long periods of time, sometimes only to jump out at some kind of trigger to wrestle us to the ground with self-accusation, self-loathing, self-disgust, and the fear of ever being found out. And maybe me just talking about it like this has been a little bit of a trigger for you right now. And you are now thinking of something you're very ashamed of. And if so, I want you to carefully hold on to that for a minute, knowing that I'm going to back off just a bit right now and have a time to tell a story of a maybe seemingly harmless time of shame from my own memory bank. I'm home from school. I've convinced my mom that I'm not well enough to go to school, but the truth is I'm actually very desperate for a break from the bullying, the relentless bullying that I experienced daily, all the way from grade 4 to grade 8. It was a brutal time in my life, and I just needed a break from it. My grandma is there to look after us because my dad is at work and my mom has gone to a dentist appointment. So it's me and my little sister, who's probably 3 at the time. I come upon my little sister in the bathroom, all intent on washing her hands. She's pulled the little stool up and she's washing her hands in the sink. And it occurs to me that I would be amused by causing her some distress. I think to myself, wouldn't it be fun to lock her in the bathroom for a little while, just to get her upset long enough to satisfy my need to see her upset. So very quietly I click I get the lock the way it would lock, and I pull the door ever so quietly. She doesn't see me, perfect. And I pull the door shut. And as soon as I hear that click, suddenly it occurs to me, wait, she is actually locked in that bathroom. I won't be able to let her out. And the horror of it just overwhelms me so much, the shame of it, that I literally go and hide in the closet. And in a few minutes, the expected, hoped for reaction happens, where she's trying to open the door and she's banging on the door, and then she starts to yell and cry and kick at the door and scream, and my grandma comes and she tries to get her to unhook the very complicated little lock that was there. There were no safety-proof locks back then. cannot get her to calm down enough to do that. So she calls me. She calls me, Ruth Ann, she says, like, do you have a key for this bathroom? Your sister has locked herself in the bathroom. Yes, I agree. That's what happened. My grandma calls the fire department. Huge firefighters come in and they have to rip the door right off the jamb in order to rescue my poor sister, who is there on the floor by then, having been in there for an hour, completely out of her mind, sobbing. She's sobbing. Her face is swollen. She's doing the shuddery sighs, and everybody is saying, isn't it a shame that she locked herself in the bathroom? I perpetuate that lie. Yes, I would say later, when my mom came home to find out what happened, yes, she locked herself in the bathroom. Yes, I would say at the dinner table, when the family was recounting the events of the day, she locked herself in the bathroom. Yes, I would say for days afterwards, when neighbors would ask, why was there a fire truck outside your house that day? My sister locked herself in the bathroom. And I kept that secret for a long time, until I was a teenager, and I confessed. I asked for forgiveness from my sister, from my parents, not from my grandma because she was with us anymore. And I asked for forgiveness from the same Jesus who hung on the cross. Now, if that sounds like an innocent childhood prank to you, please do not let me off the hook so easily. Remember, I was home because I needed a break from being bullied and tormented, and yet somehow I had it in my heart to torment someone else. I did it deliberately, and I perpetuated the lie. And I needed forgiveness. So here I would gently come back to whatever it is you're holding on to and ask, what shame do you have locked up in the bathroom? Jesus can forgive that. What do you need to hear from Jesus right now? Maybe in this first word from the cross is just as simple and profound as this: I forgive you. Maybe right now, as we head into this time of pondering and reflecting on the cross of Jesus, right now in these weeks between now and Easter Sunday morning, that's the first thing you need to hear. To hear it and receive it. Maybe to hear and receive it afresh if you've already come to the cross. To be reminded, rebuked even, why are you holding on to that when it's already been forgiven? And perhaps, maybe you need to hear and receive this forgiveness for the very first time. Maybe this is the first time you're hearing the good news that this horrible shame you're holding on to can be forgiven. Because if Jesus could forgive this, then there's nothing you and I are ashamed of that's beyond his grace. Nothing. Receive the forgiveness. It's there for you. And there's more. Because if Jesus could forgive all the wickedness that was being done to him, then there's also no hate that you or I are holding on to that's justified. And this, my friends, is very good news indeed. Refusing to forgive, says Anne Lamott, is like drinking rat poison and waiting for the rat to die. But we do it, don't we? We hold on to woundings as if somehow it's going to make things right, even out the score, as if somehow our hatred of someone is bringing justice to the situation. We believe in love. We would say we would want love to be a priority, but we seem to justify hate as long as someone has harmed us enough. Then it's okay to hate them. We believe we're justified to withhold forgiveness. Now, it needs to be stated that for forgiveness to be real, it has to be sincere. And for it to be sincere, then, in our fallen humanity, this often requires a period of time, a process, when dealing with great harm. This is not something that should happen quickly or lightly. And I say this with great respect and admiration for those of you who have already moved through this process and have forgiven the unthinkable. Or for those of you who are right now moving through that process, your feet are pointed towards forgiveness and are moving in that direction. Well done. You are evidence of God's existence. It's the only way that you could move through this and get to a place of forgiveness. Well done. So take your time. Get professional counsel if you need it. Figure out the steps that you might need to take. But if we are to understand that Jesus was able to forgive what was happening to him during the process of a Roman crucifixion, then we have to conclude that there is no hate that you or I could hold on to that's justified. Not if we say we follow this Jesus, this crucified Jesus. Remember, Jesus spoke these words of forgiveness over people who were showing no remorse of any sort. No restraint, no remorse, no acknowledgement that what they were doing was wrong. In 1993, there was a Trappist monk whose name was Christian de Cherche, and he was serving in a monastery in Algeria. He was a missionary to the Islamic people. And in that year, 1993, Muslim radicals rose to power, and many Christians evacuated because they were being executed. Christians were being executed just for being Christian by the Muslim radicals. But de Cherche stayed. He and a few of his fellow monks stayed, knowing that it could cost them their lives. And it did. Christian de Cherche was beheaded in 1996. And knowing the risks, at some point between the radical uprising in 1993 and his death in 1996, he wrote a letter to his family with the intention that it would be opened after he was executed. That's why he wrote the letter. In the letter, he asks that those who love him pray that he was worthy of such a sacrifice. He expresses his fear that his death would be used to accuse in general the Islamic people that he had come to love. And this is how he ends his letter. Obviously, my death will justify the opinion of all those who dismissed me as naive or idealistic. Let him tell us what he thinks now. But such people should know that my death will satisfy my most burning curiosity. At last I will be able, if God pleases, to see the children of Islam as he sees them. illuminated in the glory of Christ, sharing in the gift of God's passion and of the Spirit, whose secret joy will always be to bring forth our common humanity amidst our differences. And he goes on a little to thank those who will stand by his family in their grieving of him. He thanks God for the life he was given to live for God's purpose. And then, unbelievably, he says this to the one who would ultimately take his life, his executioner. He addresses his executioner directly, and he says, "And to you too, my friend of the last moment, who will not know what you are doing. Yes, for you too, I wish this thank you, this adieu, whose image is in you also, that we may meet in heaven like happy thieves, if it pleases God, our common Father." Amen. I can't even. What do you need to hear from Jesus right now? Maybe it's let it go. Let that hatred go. Do whatever it takes to release your need to justify holding on to it. And let it go. Not so simple, I know. And I would repeat that in order to be sincere, it can't be done quickly or lightly. Take your time, get the help, figure out the steps you need to take. But if we are to understand that Jesus was able to forgive what was happening to him in the process of his crucifixion, and if we are to claim that we are disciples of, followers of this Jesus, we have to believe, we have to conclude that there is no hate you and I might want to hold on to that's justified. Hard words. And I said, that's what I meant when I said that there's going to be some hard words spoken in this series, this long meditation of Christ's crucifixion and Christ on the cross and his suffering. It's going to be difficult. But I ask again, what do you need to hear from Jesus right now? Right now, as we keep moving through this particular Lenten season of our own kind of long duress, I hope that today you can hear good news. The good news is that if Jesus could forgive the worst that humanity could inflict on him, then there's nothing you are ashamed of that's beyond his grace. And he says to you this morning, I forgive you. And if Jesus could forgive the worst that humanity could inflict on him, then there is no hate that you're holding on to that's justified. And he says to you this morning, let it go. In my name and by my power, let it go. And because these words from Jesus may be difficult, and we need a layer of peace even just to receive them, we end with a blessing of peace from 2 Thessalonians. God bless you.